And we're very lucky today to have with us one of the most influential women in UK technology, Anne-Marie Imafidon, a child computing and maths prodigy who founded the Stemettes in 2013, a social enterprise focused on promoting women into STEM careers, and a passionate campaigner for greater diversity in UK tech. So I'd now like to invite Ellie Zolfagharifard to join us again for the next session and to discuss the issue of algorithmic bias and the industry's enduring problem with ethnic and gender diversity. Over to you, Ellie.
Thanks, Robin, for that introduction. So algorithms really have become ingrained in our everyday lives, often in ways we don't realise. So, for instance, if you're applying for a loan or getting a mortgage, or even just watching something on Netflix, algorithms are making decisions for us all the time. But the problem with them is that they are powered by data, and data can be inherently flawed and biased. So today we're speaking to Dr Anne-Marie Imafidon about this issue, among others, and what we can do in the tech industry to overcome it. Now, as Robin said, Anne-Marie is the co-founder of Stemettes, a wonderful organisation dedicated to inspiring and promoting young women in the STEM sector. She's certainly an inspiration herself. At 11, she was the youngest female ever to pass an A-level in computing. And at 20, she received her master's in maths and computer science at Oxford. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for joining us today. It's really lovely to see you.
Thanks, Ellie. It's good to be back. Good to see you again as well.
So how are things going at Stemettes? Can you tell me a bit about some of the work you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so things are going. I think it's been a really interesting period for us. We've had to kind of pivot, as most others have done, into going completely virtual. But for us, it's opened up so many opportunities for providing certifications for girls, young women and non-binary young people who haven't been able to get, whether it's, the whole A-levels and GCSEs debacle or just not having the right provision kind of pre-pandemic anyway. So we've had kind of hundreds of them gaining cyber certifications and Python certifications together. We've also had our mentoring continue. And a big thing for us has been, we're all about equitable practice, or all about being inclusive. So we've also been working with girls who are data and device poor to ensure that they've got the right machinery, they've got the laptops, they've got the data package to be able to participate in all that we're able to offer as well.
Great. Yeah, that's more important than ever right now, I think. You mentioned the A-levels debacle, and I think everyone was quite shocked in August when the grades were announced, and they were nearly 40%, I think, lower than the teachers' assessments. And obviously that downgrading effect was greater for state schools. Do you think this is something that policymakers and others should have predicted? And why is it that they didn't?
I think it was predicted. They did hear the predictions. I think the people that were shocked were the ones who didn't know what was happening next. And there was definitely a big group of people who weren't shocked, who've seen the statistics. They knew what the intentions were of the algorithm. And so, of course, if you base things on cohorts in schools in particular areas, like, you're definitely going to have seen, it was inevitable kind of what ended up happening. So I think it was definitely, in the broader topic of what we're talking about, I know it was called a mutant algorithm, but this was more kind of statistical analysis that was done. But it was definitely inevitable. We definitely kind of saw it coming. And Jenny Tennyson, I think at the ODI, has done a really good breakdown of what were the assumptions, what were the data sets at each point. And there was no way that you were going to start with that data and come out with anything else.
Yeah, I guess there's lots of examples of this where the data has been biased. I mean, it's whoever programs it, what decisions you make, and that's affected women, I think, in many ways, as well as other groups. Are there any areas in your work that you've done that have particularly shocked you in the way algorithms or data are used and how they've affected people?
So I think for me, like we're saying, it's less the shock of kind of how they're affecting. I think it's the shock of the use cases. So I'm a trustee at the Institute for the Future of Work, and And we've recently put out this a proposal for an act on algorithm, but it's definitely something we've seen where kind of looking at, we kind of have evaluated and analysed kind of 3 machine learning use cases, particularly in the workplace, around job adverts and around kind of talent management, so kind of managing our workforce. And I think there's, with things like that, it was definitely interesting to see kind of, you know, it's the data is what to do with that. It's who is manipulating and who is making decisions about that, and what are they missing, right? So if we had an example with job advertising where, if you say to a particular social media platform, I want this to be a successful job advert, and success means people click on it, and success means, you kind of have all these parameters, some that you define, others that you don't, which means the social media platform defines those other parts of success. It's ended up being that, women aren't shown technical roles, or the kind of the average salary for the roles that have been shown to women have been much lower than those for men. And it's been really interesting to kind of pick out, there's causality in that, if you already don't think that you could be technical, then why would a job ad being shown to you for a technical role be successful, right? So I think there's things like that we don't consider, but there's also sometimes the assumption that data is truth, which I think, we've got lots of examples of, people being undocumented, stories not being told, even just data collection methods. And, if we look at even the facial recognition example, one of our case studies was someone that was using algorithms and using AI for workplace management. And so we're combining facial recognition that was tracking someone, on the retail floor, and overlapping all these data sets together, and then to make decisions on shifts, to make decisions on locations of workers, to make decisions on pay, to make decisions on promotion. And, it's again, if you're building these things on kind of shaky ground or unequal ground, why do you think you're going to be able to build something that can stand tall and do right? So I think there's kind of plenty of use cases where if you dig a little bit deeper, kind of you were never going to be successful at that. It was always going to be an attempt at best. But the other big thing we have to look back at is, even before we had the machines, a lot of things were unfair. So if I'm building it and things were unfair, then why do I think that building an algorithm is going to make it less unfair if I'm the person that's built it, has built all the assumptions, built all my perspectives into it?
Yeah, you're right. I think we do think data is scientific and neutral, and we have this assumption. But what's the way around this? What do you think we can do as not a quick solution, but one of the first things we can do to address it as a society?
Yeah, so there's 2 big things that we're definitely advocating, and the Act is kind of a big part of this. I think there's one side is that diversity side of, we need to prioritize the value of different perspectives. If we know that these things aren't going to be fair, if we know that the data can't be neutral, then we've got the right kind of teams that can give us a better chance of making the right decisions, of choosing the right use cases, of building these things correctly. But the other thing is to audit what is being used already. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge, things aren't great. It's possible that we could build algorithms that help improve the status quo and pull us in the right direction. And how do we make sure that we're auditing what we use and how we use it, so that then, you've got the right. You might bring in this, shiny, fancy AI that's going to help tell whether, the emotions of children, and is going to use kind of body language, social science to make decisions on should you call a child in if they're feeling a particular way, or should you leave them alone. But I think we also need to then say, okay, cool, what have we audited lower down? Things like our Equalities Act that we have here is very different from what the Equalities Act equivalents look like across the world. And so if you're buying in something from somewhere else, you need to audit it and say, does this maintain the standards that we know we have in law? And above that, does it maintain the standards that we know we want for our culture, way that we're a company? So I think it's going to be really important companies to prioritize doing this, knowing that, the impact isn't just for you as a company, and it's not just for the individuals that work for you, but it's also at a systems level. There's also societal impact by the decisions that you make in-house in your company.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing companies take this seriously and move towards that end goal?
Not enough, and it's not being prioritized. And I think definitely with the pandemic, there's been a huge shift in priorities. There's been a huge push towards, obviously, this is panic stations, right? So I think even just on the D&I side, as much as there's been so much talk around Black Lives Matter and the unfortunate and frustrating, frankly, kind of death of George Floyd, I think there's definitely been less of kind of the might, the muscle, the prioritization that's been put on this in the current scenario. So, we are seeing some companies now doing impact assessments, equality impact assessments, but it's not something that we're seeing whole scale. It's not something we're seeing widely enough. And at the moment, there's quite a big fight for survival. And so this is something that's going further and further down people's priorities. We've seen a lot of redundancies in this space. There's not as much going on, and I thought it was hard. It'd be hard to do any less than we were already doing. But here we are, I guess, on the D&I side.
Oh, I mean, hopefully priorities will change with some of the projects you've got going on with Stemettes and other organisations. But just to focus again on diversity, did you yourself ever experience as a woman that you were sidelined or that you were underestimated in any of the roles that you've been in?
I think this is something we've definitely spoken about before, where I'm not only a woman, I'm also Black, I'm young, I'm from East London. I'm a child of immigrants, so there's a lot of things that I have stacked for me in going to Oxford and all those privileges, but a lot of things I have stacked against me. And so for me, it's always been kind of, there have been people that say no. I'm not perceptive in. Sorry, was there or meant that I was not good enough. So I've definitely, had the folks who don't believe that I know enough about query optimization to know more than them. I've definitely had people not, assume that I don't know, I'm on the board for a particular reason, not because there's actually things that people can benefit from when I open my mouth. Kind of view. So it's definitely something I've seen, but I think I've been fortunate enough to also have the right kind of mentors, the right kind of sponsors, and have the right kind of network around me, but also the resilience and the confidence in my own value, my own skills, and my own abilities, which is I've got that despite all the messages and the conditioning and the treatments and the microaggressions that I might have come up against over time. But there's lots of examples. There's always that if I'm not pulled forward, I might be the most influential woman in IT, but I'm still a young Black woman, right? And so if you kind of see that name and you don't recognize it, then you're going to think, well, what does she know? How can she possibly have anything to give? So it's definitely their loss.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's probably a lot of very talented young women who maybe don't have that confidence, but they are talented. How do we make sure both men and women help encourage these young women into STEM sectors? What can we do?
I love that question. Yeah, I love that question. I think it's important as well to note that, a lot of this time when we talk about imposter syndrome or any of these things, they're not innate, they're not internal, it's external forces that have done that. It's, undermining someone, it's not putting them forward for things, it's passing them over for promotion, it's, always repeating what they've said and taking credit for it rather than saying, well, yeah, thank you very much, Anne-Marie, thank you very much, Ellie. So I think it's something we all need to do, and we all need to be intentional about how we can open up those opportunities and how we can kind of sponsor people that are a little bit different from our default technologists, whatever that might mean to you. So whether it is putting them forward for those things, it is suggesting them for speaking roles, it is suggesting them for positions of responsibility. But I think ultimately what I've been talking to companies about is kind of there's no point in having diversity and inclusion if you don't listen to those people, right? If you don't give them the opportunity to show that value and feel that sense of belonging. So it's going to be really important as well for us to say, how do I know I belong in this technical place, and how do I allow others to know that they belong, right? Which I think, if you don't belong, if you don't feel like you belong, you can still be a woman, working at insert name of big tech, health tech company, building a period tracker that ends up not working, right? So I think it's really important for us to ensure that we're listening, right? And you don't listen so you can give an answer, you listen so you can learn something and act differently as a result of what that person said, but also looking for value in the difference, right? So you need someone different in that team to say, I went to a particular school and my A-level grades were very different from the others in my class. And so I probably shouldn't statistically be put in a cohort like that that's just dependent on the school that I was attending at that time. But also we probably shouldn't fix grades based on what previous years have achieved when this is a new year and a different set of people. So I think challenging those assumptions is something that you need in every code review, right? In every product roadmap, in every feature set, in whatever it is that you're doing as a technologist, it's the small changes that then add up to the big movements in the right direction. So there's lots for each of us to do, but I think as long as we're intentional about this, as long as we say, you know what, I know there was the kind of dead white guy that we've always been sold are the only people that can be technology innovators. There are lots, no offense to anyone that is a dead white guy that's listening in today, but there are lots of other kinds of people that can also be contributing. And what are we all doing to ensure that the Anne-Maries, the Ellies, the whoever else it might be is able to flourish and we're able to get the value of their perspective into our tech? Because it's not just about the deterministic technical level of what's going on. This is no longer just about us playing with tech, right? The implications of what we're building are now so far-reaching that it's our duty, right? You're creating a future that we don't deserve by not being intentional now and saying we need the different types of value around the table when we're making technical decisions.
That's very powerful and makes complete sense, and it just makes you think, why haven't we done this before? Why isn't this something that's just happening? I think, is it just 24% of roles are
Graduates.
women and it's do you see that changing with the younger girls that you're working with? Do you see a shift in perspective from them that they think, I can do this?
Yeah, and this is why I do what I do. And as much as I get involved with the Institute, I'm on the Hamilton Commission. Like, there's all these other things that I do. I think for me, that's why I enjoy my time the most with Stemettes. The young people are brilliant, but I think the other thing is there's the hope in they're a little bit more prepared for what's coming. They have a little bit more, and they've got a kind of formative experience, positive formative STEM experience, but also a formative experience of knowing their own value and knowing where that comes from. And so I think what we're already seeing is alum who are kind of going out into industry and they're seeing what previous generations have seen. And they're like, well, that's not good enough. And so I kind of all the time I'm getting calls being like, well, Anne-Marie, I've quit that job because they did that and they did this and that wasn't right. And now this is what I'm doing instead. So do you want to help me publish this survey so I can get my market research done and get started on my own thing? So I think it's been really heartening to see kind of what happens next. And so really my message is, as much as it is, inspire the next generation and get involved in bringing them along, I think it's also prepare yourself to be held to a higher standard. Because the same as what we've seen on the climate change front, I think the new generation of technologists, are going to take this more seriously. They understand the impact it's having. And if present employers and the industry at the moment isn't going to take this seriously, they will. And they'll outperform you, they'll outrun you, they'll, overtake you. So yeah, watch out really is my message from the next generation.
Great, thank you. I mean, that is a very hopeful and positive kind of look to the future. You did mention that, someone called you to say the person I was working for wasn't good enough, so I've moved. Is that the advice you'd give to women who are struggling within a workplace and facing sexism, or should they remain there and try and fight it out?
I mean, everyone has their purpose and their calling, right? I wouldn't say that everyone should kind of down tools and run their own Stemettes organization. I think with a lot of folks, you end up having your confidence eroded to the point that then the value you did have even ends up being diminished. So I think I'm always, and technical skills are so transferable. There's so much that you can do. The world is your oyster. So I think my thing for women and non-binary folks who are facing that is always, know you've got the option to go elsewhere and take your skills elsewhere, take your value to somewhere where you're not just going to be tolerated, but where you can be celebrated and valued. So I think that's always my thing, kind of keep what you've got for now, but go and find somewhere else to go to that's going to be better. But I think even if you do want to stay and make things and improve them and ameliorate the situation for others, then find your tribe and don't do it on your own. I think strength external networks that are like the adult version of Stemettes, because we only work with young people. This is kind of if you're in your first job or beyond. There are so many networks. There's Ada's List. There's lots of different places you can go to. So kind of gather your numbers externally and internally and get to work. But I think my thing is always, having these skills means that you have options. So always be open to exploring what those options are. And they're so transferable that, you can find your purpose, with those technical skills pretty much anywhere, which is the other thing that's the reason why the girls are like they are. They know they've got options, right? So they don't leave the industry full stop, but they're like, well, I tried that. I'm going to go there instead. I'm going to do my own thing. And they know that they're able to do that, and have got enough of the history, I guess, of tech entrepreneurs and tech folks to say, yeah, I can do that like Stephanie Shirley. I can do that like Jacqueline de Rojas. I can do that like Gladys West. I can, do that like any of the other fantastic people that we have that are leading the charge. I can do that like Sharmadean Reed. So I think that's definitely my thing for women. You've got options. So you don't have to stay there and be treated like that. Go somewhere else where you'll be celebrated, not just tolerated.
Right. Sounds like there's a army of Stemettes that's coming up that are really going to shake things up soon.
They're coming.
I'm looking forward to,
This is a warning siren for you all.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing what your organisation does in the coming year, and do keep us informed. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for spending time talking to us about this today.
Thanks for having me.